Give this about a 5-second start. So this, first of all, welcome to the Sullivan Center. Until very recently, this was probably the most technologically advanced classroom on the campus until occupational science, occupational therapy down the hall built theirs, and they've got a few more bells and whistles in theirs. But so I'd say our two classrooms are two of the best equipped classrooms in both campuses. So welcome to the Sullivan Center. We are now recording this session, so for those people who want to view it later, so if you have colleagues who would like to view it, we'll have a link to it ready to go by tomorrow. If you have questions, just give me a second. There are microphones around the room, but I've turned them off. But if there's a question that you want to ask, I'll turn the mics on. So if you just give me a second to do that, hopefully it won't slow things down too much. So I've got kind of a technological juggling act going on up here. I've got one computer, one iPad, the control panel for the room. I have a plant in the room who's doing a Twitter feed for us. So lots of things going on, and excuse me. Hopefully you will not be too critical of me if the technology fails at one point or another. I don't think it will, but we'll see. So we want to talk about iPad use in the classroom and in the clinic. And the title of the talk or the session is There's an App for That. And we do have a live Twitter feed going. So if you want to tweet some questions, Annabelle is sort of keeping track of those over there. Wave your hand, Annabelle. And she'll be tweeting some things as well. So you can go back through, if you're on Twitter, which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you, 6 of you have never used, and some of you only occasionally use. But if you use the best PT apps hashtag, you can actually go back and look at the tweets that that were done live as we're going through this, and any of you in the audience want to tweet as well as Annabelle's tweets. So I am speaking for Julie Tilson, who is my colleague here in the division. She and I gave a presentation 2 weeks ago in San Diego at a National American Physical Therapy Association meeting. And in San Diego, the session went quite well, and we got a lot of positive feedback from it. So I want to thank the CIMTH for inviting me to come today. Julie is expecting and actually had some false labor last night, so we kind of planned on her not being here anyway. So I'm going to be doing, for the first half, I'll be going through her material, which is really using the use of the iPads in clinical practice, and then the second half will be the use of the iPad in teaching in the classroom. And what I will be talking about is both from the clinician/student's perspective and from the teacher and the student in the classroom's perspective. Okay? So before I get started, I do want to show you this video. So watch her hands. Watch what she's doing with her hands. She's already learned. She's trying to change or manipulate the magazine. And here's another magazine. What's going on here? Why isn't this changing the page? Is it broken or what? Here she goes again. She's doesn't know how to use the magazine. It's pretty much a useless thing to her. And here's a really interesting thing. So she's kind of, okay, that's supposed to do something. Well, maybe it's my finger. Let me just double check. Does my finger work? Yeah. Finger seems to work okay. So let me go back and, no, this isn't working. And I give up. Give me back the one that works. So here she is back with the iPad. And happier than a clam, too. So this is posted on YouTube. You can find it relatively easy. The quote that I love here is at the bottom is Steve Jobs has coded a part of her OS. You know, and just to kind of point out the number one, the ease of use that's built into a tablet like the iPad. Now, I don't own stock in Apple, but there is a fair amount of ease of use there that's very intuitive, and you can get a lot of things done using an iPad. And particularly now with they're getting smaller, and now you have we had the Maxi Pad, now we have the Mini Pad, so that's a little more easily carried around in the clinic and still has all the functionality of the bigger one. So they're probably going to be a little bit more ubiquitous as we go through, as we progress over the next year or two. So I want to talk about evidence for use of mobile technology in the clinic, some examples of iPad use in enhancing clinical practice, and also examples of iPad use to promote student learning. So between 1995 and 2008, mobile technology in healthcare has been growing, of course, slowly in the beginning, but much more quickly more recently. But there is a study that's going on that Dr. Tilson is involved in, looking at what the effectiveness is for using mobile technology for seeking information, for improving documentation, for improving decision-making, and enhancing efficiency. So that's actually a study that they've done, and it is in review at this point. Now, the BlackBerry, the Crackberry came out in 2002 and was widely adopted early on. The iPhone came out in 2007. Seems like it's been around forever, but it's only really been around since 2007. And then the Google Android platform came out in 2008, and their market opened in 2008. And then just really 2 years ago, the iPad came out in 2010. And we've got the app stores now. We've got the two big major players are the App Store from Apple and the Google Play from supporting the Android operating system. Both have about 700,000 plus and growing apps that you can download. As of late 2012, 35 billion downloads from the App Store and 25 billion from Android. So going way back to BlackBerry, the first really true smartphone, and you could probably throw the Palm in there as well. We've come a long way. BlackBerry's sort of fading now out. We'll see what their latest iteration does for their company. In the UK in 2011, Payne did a study and just looking at smartphone use with physicians. They looked at their junior physicians. 80% of them had, 74% of the junior doctors had a smartphone. 80% of those were iPhones, and 75% of them had medical apps on their phone. Mostly for drug reference, disease management guidelines, reference for acute conditions, and to a much smaller degree, electronic patient record access. So it is being used, and if you read through sort of the technology literature or the technology magazines, a lot of that use has been driven more by personal use rather than enterprise-wide adoption of the technology. So a physician wants to use a phone, decides to buy an iPhone, figures out, hey, I've got all these great apps I can use, and starts using them for these applications, as you see here. MOSA in BMC Medical Informatics and Decision Making just this past year did a systematic review of healthcare applications for smartphones, found 83 apps described in the literature. For the healthcare professional, again, disease diagnosis, drug reference, medical calculators were used quite extensively, and then also they were using them for literature searches. Students were using them, medical students were using them for educational purposes, and then patients were actually using them for disease management, everything from patient education to here's how you do different types of exercises, or here's how you take your medications. So this is a growing segment, I guess, a growing use of smartphones and mobile technology in the healthcare setting. As far as iPads specifically, what we did here, Julie Tilson was took the lead on this. She gave 11 DPT students iPads to use in their clinical rotations. These are students in the second and third year of our program. The range of the number of days that they had in the clinic was anywhere from 30 days to 120 days per student. 95% of these students were in outpatient physical therapy settings, 55% in orthopedic, 25% peds, and 20% in a neurologic population or some mix of different diagnoses. These are our iPads. We loaded them with applications, spent up to $450 per iPad, to load the applications. And basically we loaded them with the applications that the student asked for. They had to justify why they wanted this application. So, Angry Birds to use during lunchtime, not so much, but if you want Goodreader or you want Hippocrates for your Goodreader for your PDFs or Hippocrates for drug reference, great, we'll load those on. So we had administrative control of the iPads, so the students couldn't just do whatever they wanted. If they wanted an app, we loaded it on there for them. And as I said, more than 60 apps overall were loaded on. Many of them, hey, this looks like a great app. Can we load it on? Yeah, sure. And then what we did then was we looked to see how they were using their iPads and what apps they were using. So we asked them to log their usage. The iPads that we gave them had 3G service so that they could use it even if they didn't have wireless access. And we gave them HIPAA and professional training on using their iPads and maintaining patient confidentiality. This was appsforpt.tk was a website that was working. I actually checked it today, and it's not working. I can't access it anymore. But it was kind of a place to help people find and give feedback on different applications. That was a resource that we used early on. So I left this slide in mainly to remind myself to tell you that, look, you can Google, apps in iPad apps in physical therapy or iPad apps in occupational therapy, which are the two things that I looked at, and you'll get a ton of Google hits. And there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of websites where people are talking about, hey, here are the apps that I use. This is what I've used it for. This seems to be very worthwhile. So a lot of people are doing the test driving for you out there. If you just take a little time to search for them. Hang on just a second. I'll just repeat the question. Go ahead. What is the question?
The question is, some of those apps you have up there are more generic, like mobility and ultimate their documenting various basic documenting.
Right. Many of these apps are generic. They aren't necessarily medical applications. I'm going to go through several of them, but in the upper right corner here, the green one, that's Goodreader. That's basically a PDF reader, a document. You can take notes and things with that, so it's a very generic thing. But as you can see, you've got, I'm blanking on the name of that one. I know someone's going to see this and kill me, but no, this one with the scapula here at second row on the left. Nova has some anatomy applications and so on. So there's some here that are specific to medicine, and there are some that aren't. The bottom row, second from the left, this blue one with the pencil icon is a note-taking application as an example. And I'll talk about each of those. Those two in particular I'll be talking about. So did they get used? Were the iPads used? Yes, they were used a lot. 70% of 580 clinic days across all these students, 70% of the time they were using them. And multiple times a day, on average 1.5 times per day, ranging from, don't ask me how you do half a use, but anyway, up to 3.5 times a day. And 790, almost 800 clinically related incidences of use by the students. And it kind of breaks down this way. Most of the use was for collaboration, background information here. So in the blue, so that's basically searching for background information on diagnoses or on different conditions. Foreground is looking for, now you know what the condition is, and now you're looking for information specifically on that condition. There's about 20% of the time used for patient education. They use it as a tool about 17% of the time. And what that means is they use it as a camera, or they use it as to record audio, something along those lines. So they actually use the iPad as a tool. Some of them were documenting using an electronic medical record, and then collaboration was, hey, look at this, show me this, teaching one another those types of activities. So as you can see, 40% of the time they were using it to gather information, either background or foreground information. So 41% of the time was information seeking. So they're using it as a reference. That's the largest chunk of their time. They're using it as a reference tool. Patient education was also quite important, as you can see, which is kind of neat. I mean, I know in my practice we have anatomy atlases in every room, and we tend to pull those out. They're pretty dog-eared because we're thumbing through them and trying to show the patients, here's what your condition is, or here's where the problem lies. So now we have a lot of interactive types of ways to educate our patients. In the end, they really were using 46 different apps, the most, 246 searches. It took them about 5 minutes per search, anywhere from 1 to 30 minutes to find foreground information. And they categorized their searches as being successful about 80% of the time. So that's actually not bad, if you think about trying to put evidence-based practice, into clinical practice. Here are kids who are making use of the technology and doing something like, for example, they used Safari about 30% of the time just as a web browser, and looked up something like retrolisthesis, did a Google search for cervical facet referral patterns, those types of things. About 12% of the time they're using the orthopedic manual therapy series, which is a series of apps that gives you special tests. So, boy, I want to make sure, does this person have a meniscal tear or a labral tear? What's the test for that? Let me go look that up. 10% of the time was looking at drug interactions and side effects using Hippocrates. And then they used anatomy applications, either for reference or for patient ed. Goodreader for reading their PDFs, and Motion Doctor, which is an exercise application. So I'll talk about some of those as we go through. So Safari is preloaded and free on the iPad. That's the web browser that comes with the iPad. So they use that a lot. Hippocrates and Micromedex are two different drug reference apps that are quite useful. NerveWiz, I'll be talking about that. It's a nerve and innervation application. CORE, or the clinical orthopedic exam, I'll talk about that a little bit, but it's basically a listing of different examinations you can do in orthopedic physical therapy, and it includes videos actually of how to do them. And then Goodreader was their PDF reading application. So as an example, so here's Safari, again, preloaded and free, and this is just a Google search. They're looking for the Fear Avoidance Belief Questionnaire, or FABQ, and just trying to find out some information about that. In terms of looking for drug references, here's the screen from Micromedex, and you start typing in the medication here at the top, and it starts listing them for you, and you can do a very nice search, including things like black box warnings, the dosing indications. So what is this drug used for? Oh, that's right. Black box warnings, contraindications, and adverse effects and drug interactions particularly, because Of course, as physical therapists, we aren't prescribing medications, but we certainly need to know what the implications of taking that medication are on the patient. So drug reference is very, very useful. And then you get down to, here's an example of adverse effects, so some common adverse effects, as well as some serious adverse effects. So that's Micromedics. The Hippocrates app works very similarly. NerveWiz is a free app that is actually quite nice. It's really not so much for patient education as it is for particularly student use. So what they can do is they can go to a different muscle. They can manual muscle test it, and then mark it down as weak, strong or weak. And then NerveWiz basically gives you the nerve root that supplies those muscles, as well as the brachial plexus trunk. So if we go onto the nerve root, we can see that C5 nerve root supplies these various muscles, and the sensory distribution for C5 nerve root is as shown. So it's actually pretty nice for student reference and learning in the clinic. And here we have part of the brachial plexus, upper trunk of the brachial plexus, and what muscles it supplies. And again, it's sensory distribution. So NerveWiz, free. How you can't beat that, and students tend to use it quite a bit. The Clinical Orthopedic Exam app is quite nice. It starts out with this is a screenshot of the opening thing, the opening screen. And you can click on a region, and it'll take you to that region. So if you click on the knee, for example, it gives you different pathologies. It talks about the alignment, if there's a fusion, is there instability, so on and so forth. So those are all a list of different pathologies. And here are lists of different tests for, in this case, a meniscal tear. And when you click on one, for example, if we come down to the bottom here and look at McMurray's, which is at the bottom of the list, then we come up with McMurray's test and the purpose of the test, instructions, how you do it, how it is supposed to be done. And if you click on test properties here in the blue, you also get the validity indices for these tests. So you know what the sensitivity and specificity of these tests are. And not only that, but there are links to PubMed, so you can look at the articles that these are referencing. So as an example, we can look at the statistical review. Here's what sensitivity and specificity are, positive likelihood ratios, and those types of things. So students can review that as well. And then finally, even better is the video here at the top that actually shows you how to do that test. So if you've forgotten, or maybe you're an experienced clinician but you haven't seen as many shoulders recently, patient comes in with a shoulder, you're thinking maybe there's a labral tear, how would I go about assessing that? So it's a nice quick way to brush up on those tests. So that's a little bit of an expensive one, $40. Excuse me, students feel that you do get a lot of bang for your buck for that one. I'm pretty cheap. If it costs $1, I look at it twice. I'm looking for the free stuff, but this is one I do have on my iPad and iPhone. Goodreader is kind of a jack of all trades, your Swiss Army knife, if you will, PDF reader. The students use it a lot for putting articles on there. So they'll download the PDFs. They no longer carry around these huge notebooks full of articles. They just have them on their iPad. And they can reference them. There's a reasonable file system where you can create folders here on the left. And so you can see they have articles from week 1010 to 1014. So you can put all the articles or anything that's related to class during that week in there. In a reasonable file management, you can rename and do a bunch of stuff to the files here, copy them, and so on. Another nice thing about Goodreader is if you look down here, connects to servers. You can actually connect it to Dropbox and other cloud-based services. And once you're linked into it, once Goodreader is linked into it, if you put something on Dropbox, you can go get it out of Dropbox using Goodreader and directly download it right into Goodreader. So once you have a PDF in Goodreader, you can read it, but the nice thing is you can do your annotations here. You can do highlighting using the tools over here on the right. You can highlight, you can underline, you can strike out, you can do all kinds of things. You can also add your own handwritten notes with this freehand tool. So quite useful in terms of creating a library of PDFs. So looking for articles themselves to try to get some foreground information, 3 apps were used most often. The students felt that they were about 70% successful in finding information that they wanted. About 14 minutes per successful search, 9 minutes for unsuccessful searches. So they abandoned the search relatively quickly. And the apps that they tend to use were Safari, and they created quick links in Safari to Google Scholar, to PubMed, or the medical library website. So that's one way they got to things. So they got through articles through Norris and logging in that way. There's also 2 free apps from that access PubMed. One is PubGet, and the other one is PubMed on Tap. So those are 2 free applications or apps that you can also use. So here is an example using Safari to access PubMed. That's just a screenshot of the web page. And the nice thing about this, this is what the students would do, and all iPads can do this, is if you go up to the action button, which is in Safari is up here in the upper left, then tap on that. If you look down here, you can add to home screen. If you tap on the add to home screen, it'll ask you, do you want to do this? Do you want to add it or not? And then what happens is it creates on your home screen the, let's see, I can't see it here. There it is, right down there in the bottom right. It adds an icon on your desktop so that you can go directly to, in this case, PubMed quite easily. So that's a nice little shortcut if you weren't aware of that one. It works for your iPhone as well. In terms of patient education, 15 apps were used most often, about 150 teaching sessions. 60% of those were explaining anatomy and movement, 25% movement or image analysis, and 15% for home exercise program development and sharing. And the most useful anatomy apps were Virtual Bone Model, which is a free app on the left here. DrawMD, which is, I'll show you that here, but that's a really nice one because you can strip away layers. The orthopedic patient education, a little bit pricey, but very nice, very nicely done. It's in 3D. And the 3D4 medical anatomy series that are anywhere from $10 to $18 for different regions of the body, and really, really nicely done apps for patient education. The virtual bone model, again, it's free. The nice thing about this, it just has the knee, the hip, and the shoulder. But let's say you tap on the knee, you want to look at that. Here's an example of the knee. And the nice thing down here at the bottom is you have the slider, and you can slide it back and forth, and the knee will articulate in flexion and extension. You can rotate it around. You can label it. As you see here, you've got different labels. Each of these sort of round balls here is a label. So, it's not very sophisticated. It's certainly not sophisticated enough to learn the anatomy as a student, but definitely sophisticated enough to teach a patient about the anatomy of the knee. Another nice thing about this is, in this case, you have a total knee replacement, and it actually, as you take the slider through, it actually takes the parts apart and puts them back together again. So you can say, look, here's what's going to happen. They're going to put a piece of femur in, they're going to put a tibial plateau in, and they're going to put something behind your patella, and that's what your knee is going to look like afterwards. For the Nova series, here's an example using the elbow. And here we've cut away sort of this, cut away the layers here, and we're down to relatively deep. We can see the nerves, see the biceps and bone, and then the radial ligament. Here we have sort of the surface anatomy, and if you look closely here on the right, it says swipe to rotate, and up here on the top, we can drag to cut, so we can cut away or peel away layers and work our way down to the deeper layers. So as an example, here we are taking away the first layer, and then we can sort of rotate that around. And so if someone says, why is my leg numb, or why is my arm numb? Well, here's the nerve, this is where it goes, and it may be compromised. And then we can take it all the way down to the bone and talk to them about, okay, look, this is why, this is your elbow, this is where the bursa might be, here's the capsule, here are the ligaments, and so if you're the side of your elbow is bothering you, have tennis elbow or whatever, it could be the ligaments or it could be the tendons, whatever. You get the idea. We could actually go a little bit further and get into the joint and talk about the joint and talk about arthritis if you wanted to, looking at the humeral ulnar joint here. So again, quite nice. And don't forget, you can rotate this around, and so you can see it from all angles. So that's an example of the type of anatomy apps that are out there and available, and sort of the sophistication of those apps. So there are several video apps that are out there available, and of course you can just use the camera that is preloaded on the iPad. I mean, it comes with this camera. It's a quite nice camera. It has pretty good resolution and captures relatively fast motion. So you can just video the patient moving and then use that you can analyze their movement later. But you also have these two apps here, V1 Golf, which is free, and UberSense, which is free. You have to register with both of those, and you can upgrade and so on. But there's a couple others. Kinesio Capture is another one. But the nice thing about these is you can videotape from within the app and then do some video analysis. So here's a screenshot using UberSense, and you can put two videos side by side. So here are two golfers. You have the pro on the right, and you have the patient on the left. And the nice thing is you have tools up here. So in this case, we have the ability to take this tool and draw angles. And by drawing angles, you can say, look, you need to bend your knee more or less, or this is what's going on. An example that, I used UberSense today to videotape a patient and his neck range of motion, and I showed him from last week to this week the difference in his range. And you can actually measure the angles and show him the progress. And of course, that improvement went into my documentation. So this is really, really nice, particularly considering it's free. It's a fantastic app. We actually have 2 new courses this year. For our first-year students, movement analysis courses 1 and 2, and they're making heavy use of this app. The students are videotaping themselves and then doing the biomechanics on it. So quite nice. Home exercise programs. Again, we use the camera. The students use the camera a lot. There are some HIPAA issues with that, and so you have to have your iPad locked down and so on and so forth. So generally what the students do and what we recommend that you do in the clinic is if the patient has a phone with a camera, we just take the pictures with their phone. Then there's no HIPAA issues at all. Plus, they've got their phone, and they can always look it up and see what the exercise should be. And particularly these days, almost every phone these days has video capability, so it's pretty nice to be able to videotape the patient doing their exercises and hear your instructions as well. There's a website called HEP2Go, or Home Exercise Program to Go.com, which you can access using your web browser, and then just taking notes, writing notes down as well. So that's iPad Notes is a preloaded app. As a tool, the students they use things like Google Translate. So they had Spanish-only speaking patients, and they could do a fair amount of translation. using that app. I mentioned Dropbox earlier. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically a cloud-based server that synchronizes quite nicely with your desktop computer, but also with your mobile devices. So you can work on files in Dropbox and access it, let's say, from your laptop. And then at some point later, if you want to access it on your iPad or your iPhone, it's right there for you. Nursery Rhymes is one that was used by some students with their pediatric patients. As I mentioned, a fair number of them were in pediatric rotations during this time. So that's an app that some of them downloaded and used. ICD-9 is basically a database of ICD-9 codes. The free one is quite useful, or you can spend $15 for some more robust search features. Talked about Goodreader already, and I will talk about Notability in the second half. But Notability is a note-taking app. The last use was documentation, and the students that we had, the clinics that they were in, there are some electronic medical records that are web-based. For physical therapy, WebPT is one of those. And so they can access their clinic documentation system through using Safari. Couple of other ones are Optimus is another one, but not that many of them. I think only 3 of the students were able to access electronic medical records using their mobile technology. So this is kind of a nice starter kit, the recommendations of the students for clinical use. Safari is already on there. Micromedics is one that they liked. Hippocrates is the other. Goodreader for managing your articles and PDFs. The 3D4 Medical Anatomy series for patient education. And to a certain degree, they used it to study their anatomy. And then UberSense for the motion analysis and motion capture. That's a kind of a nice starter kit. So at this point, do you have any questions for me about any of this? Go for it.
Rob, when the students or when you use this technology to capture, let's say, an exercise treatment that you want the patient to do at home, are you following up with the patients to see how they use that? How often do they check? How often do they, does it help them even do the exercise more frequently because it's a reminder?
That's a good question. We did not have them do it in this experiment, and to be honest with you, I haven't done that. I mean, I always check when they come back the next time how the exercise is going, and if really you're doing them, great, let me see them. So that's my check to see whether or not they're doing it. And if they go, okay, well, my first exercise is this, and they start doing it, then I'm pretty confident they're doing it. And if they say, well, where's that piece of paper that you wrote down for me? I'm pretty confident they haven't been doing them. So, but I haven't really looked at whether or not providing, it's a great question, whether or not providing them the exercise, either a picture or a video on their phone, changes their, their home exercise habits. I think I'm going to start doing that from now on.
Kind of a related, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of a related question. Do you see any value in actually prescribing such apps to your patients? For example, if I come in with a shoulder pain and you say, hey, this is my prescription for you, and this is the kind of app I'm looking for you to do at home, and go ahead and take care of it. And the app could actually record and send you back the information, and you can analyze it at your clinic. Or it could actually keep track of how many times the patient is doing it. Do you see any value in such an application?
Yeah, I think there are some apps that do some or all of what you're talking about. The compliance thing would be a little bit tough, but the other aspects of what you're talking about, I think, would be useful. I think this web-based one, HEP to go, is one of those where you can access. It's because it's on their website, you can log in. I'm not sure if it's this exact one, but I know there are services like this where you can log in and create their exercise program for them, and they have a login so that they can go to it and see what they need to do. It's sort of the high-tech version of writing them down on a piece of paper and handing it to them. They have to go to the computer. So I'm not convinced that having them go to the computer to see their exercises is superior to having a piece of paper that they can put right there, carry around with them, and do the exercises. So, but I also don't know of any studies that have looked at improving compliance through these methods. Other question? Hang on just a second.
So, Rob, based on your experience using an iPad and your extensive experience in clinic, would you do things differently than the students have done?
I do pretty much what they've done. I think they've taken it another step in terms of the number of apps that they've used, the number of apps that they've explored, and then settled on these few apps that have been very useful. I didn't know about UberSense as an example, which I now use whenever I can. So, to answer your question, I don't find myself using it differently than what they have, the way they have described that they're using it. And in fact, I would say that I have picked up some of their habits more than they've done anything that I've picked up any of my habits. Does that make sense? So, other questions? Okay. Why don't you stand up and stretch for a second while I reset here. Okay, I'm ready to go. Unless you guys need a break. Well, here we go. So for the next section here, what I want to talk about is using iPads in the classroom, and again, talking about what our students have told us they do, but also give you some of my experience having encouraged iPad use in my class in this very room. So we've already talked about how an iPad can enhance clinical practice. We've talked about existing evidence for the use of mobile technology in the classroom. So I'll talk in this section about how iPads are being used by students to promote learning, how you can take, as an instructor, can take advantage of the iPads the students are bringing to class or the clinic. And then, again, we'll go through some different apps, talk about the type and quality of apps for use in the classroom. So several of the advantages for the student include being able to take notes in class, centralizing all their files, having access to the materials that they need pretty much 24/7, using the iPad as a reference, and also using it for reflective practice or reflecting on what they've learned. If we look at the advantages for the teacher, many of the same advantages apply here. There's the advantage of mobility, centralizing all your files, access whenever you need it. As an instructor, maybe doing your presentations from your iPad, doing some movement analysis, and then also having the students reflect on their on their what they're learning, either in the clinic or in the classroom. So I'll put these together, the advantages together, and we'll talk about the mobility issues first. For me, all my grading is done on spreadsheet. I don't use Blackboard. I have about 15 data points that I keep track of with my students. So I collect a lot of data on them in different ways. And so I have a spreadsheet that I've used for the last 10 years that works well for me. And the Excel equivalent on the iPad is Apple's app called Numbers. So I use Numbers to mostly, to be honest with you, to read the spreadsheets that I've created on the desktop. I know you can create a lot of nice things using Numbers, but to me, I can get it done faster with a mouse, so that's what I do. But I do use Numbers to read things that I've read Excel spreadsheets and maybe do some minor things on the iPad. In the end, I do have Numbers on my Mac as well, but I end up using Excel because I'm just more familiar with it. For my course files, I use Goodreader. And my course files include things like the student pictures. So I can carry that around with me, and I can look, oh yeah, that's Annabelle. Okay, got it. Yeah. Other course files include my handouts, the syllabus, my reading list, articles that I've assigned to the students to read. All of those things really, for me, reside in Goodreader. That's where I keep everything centralized. If I don't have it on the iPad, I generally keep it on our S drive, our network drive. And File Browser is an app that the IT guys here in our division found and set up for me on my iPad. It's actually simple to set up. And it gives me access to the network drives. So anything on our S drive or on our U drive, I can get to using File Browser. You can create shortcuts so that you can jump right to, rather than having to navigate through the, all the folders and everything, all through the different directories. You can jump directly to the folders that you want. It does require that you use VPN, which is built into the iPad. Or if you're on USC Wireless Plus on that network, you have to log in to get onto that network. Anyway, once you're in that, you don't need to use VPN. So the tunneling is done for you, and you can get right onto your network drives. So I use File Browser a lot. The nice thing is you can keep some of your files local within the app File Browser, but it's also very simple to upload them or download them, I guess, to your iPad. So, for example, if there is an article that I have or a handout or something that I have on the S drive that I don't have on my iPad, I can, using File Browser, very easily open it in, for example, Goodreader. Now I've got my files there. So I use that quite extensively. And then the other thing I can keep with me and access pretty much anywhere I want are assignments that students turn in. So for me, I have them turn them in they just email them to me in PDF format. Now that I'm using my iPad even more, I'm probably going to have them either turn it in on Blackboard, which I've never used before, or have them upload it to a Dropbox folder or something like that. So, but in any case, I have my assignments there, and I can look at them, read through them, and grade them pretty much anywhere I want to, which is, as you know, a mixed blessing. So sitting out by the pool is no longer as fun as it used to be if you have your iPad there and you're thinking, hey, I could do some work while I'm out here. It does provide me with a fair amount of mobility, so I can move around the classroom and I can move around the student group. So I'm in this classroom. The students are in this orientation here with the what we call pods. They're in their teams. And I can go around the classroom and talk to them, and I've got all my handouts, all my patient cases. Everything that I need is in my hand as I walk around and listen to them. The nice thing about that is it takes me off the stage. I don't stand up here and lecture. I do very little lecturing anyway, but I'm not stuck. I'm not here. I can move around the room. Decentralizes the class. And to be honest with you, when I do lecture, I talk from the corners more often than I talk from up here. So, in terms of centralizing my files, again, I got my handouts, student photos, and things like that. I have them all in Goodreader. I take notes using an app called Notability, which I'll demonstrate here in a little bit. And I take my meeting notes. I mean, you're all here at the university, or almost all of you, so you know it. University life includes lots of meetings, and so all my meeting notes from at USC are there. But also, for example, 2 weeks ago at our national meeting, I download the handouts into Notability, and that's where I can mark them up and write all over them. The other nice thing about Notability, if you notice the icon, is a pencil on one end, it's a microphone on the other hand. So you can record audio using Notability, and it records actually quite well. And the really cool thing about it is if you're typing notes in, it'll synchronize what you type to the audio. So again, I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. And as I said, I've got my grades. I use numbers to access my grades. I keep the grades on the S drive, so they're more secure. I don't carry them around on my iPad. Access. I have access to my notes, handouts, student photos all the time. Goodreader. That's my Swiss Army knife right there. And I have access to my grades via numbers all the time. I do use my iPad extensively to gather information. I use Safari a lot. I tend to have a dozen or 15 tabs open at any one time. And I use I guess it is an app called Instapaper, but it also adds a little button in Safari that allows you to save a web page for later viewing, even offline viewing. So I use Safari quite a bit. I use Hippocrates, particularly in the clinic, to look up drug information. It's my drug reference. I haven't used Micromedics only because Hippocrates came out first, so that's what I've been using the longest. One of the drawbacks to Hippocrates is they're constantly updating things, and when you open the app, it automatically starts updating it, and the update can take 5 minutes or more. And I have very little patience for that. So that will eventually drive me away from Hippocrates, I think. Medscape has several apps, one of which is also a drug reference, but they also have a BMI too, a body mass index tool, which is one of the required reporting things in the clinic these days for Medicare. So I end up using that tool quite a bit. I don't do a lot of presentations. When I do, I like doing them off the iPad. Keynote is the PowerPoint for the iPad. It will read PowerPoint files, so I tend to create on the laptop and then transfer them over to the iPad. It's a little bit, the iPad version is a bit stunted compared to the desktop version, so if you're planning on doing this, I wouldn't recommend you do a lot of fancy transitions and animations and things when you're creating it on your laptop or on your desktop, because they won't necessarily translate well to the mobile version. So keep it simple and then add the nice flashy stuff when you get it onto the iPad. But Keynote is really nice. It has some really, really nice features. There's also a Keynote remote app that you can put on your phone. So as long as you're on the same wireless or Bluetooth network, you can actually walk around and use your phone as a remote to advance your slides, go forward and backwards, and so on. So that's kind of a nice deal as well. For video, to watch video, there is a video app. It's a little bit. There's a couple extra steps you have to take to get the videos onto the iPad. The other app that I use a lot is YouTube, and there was a period when Google and Apple divorced, and so the YouTube app disappeared along with the Maps app. But Google has come out with a YouTube app now. There's another one that I use now because of that. I'm using one called Jasmine. But that gives you access to your YouTube videos. For movement analysis, capture, using the built-in camera analysis, you can use UberSense or V1 Golf. I'm using UberSense now. And just to give you another example of a screenshot, so this is actually ones that our students took. And they presented this case in my class. And this is a patient who was a, I want to say a T4 paraplegic complete. And his chief complaint was shoulder pain. So they did a video analysis of his wheelchair propulsion as well as his posture in the wheelchair. And the nice thing is they could compare his reaching to his propulsion phase and look at the angles there. So it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see just here the angle is 63 degrees, and here is 6.5 degrees. And what they did, very nice job of, is they went to YouTube and found examples of videos with good mechanics, pain-free mechanics, went through the literature to find out what the shoulder angles should be, and compare those numbers to their patient numbers, and they directed their rehab program to improve that. I don't have the screenshot of it, but they also did things like they looked at his posture and the angle of his seat and the height of his seat and some other attributes of his wheelchair posture, and were able to make some recommendations about a new wheelchair for him. So that was kind of a nice use for that. Question?
Yeah, just curious, is the black square over his face something you added after, or that's also part of it?
Yeah, I added the black in PowerPoint, actually. So there are HIPAA issues here when you're taking these on your iPad, so you need to lock it, and you need to lock it with the long password, not the 4-digit password, if you're going to do this. Otherwise, as soon as you've taken them, download them, do whatever you can do with them, and then get them off your iPad. That is one of the biggest drawbacks of the mobility is they're also portable, which means people can pick them up and take off with them if they want. You can do something like I did. I personalized mine quite nicely by slamming it in a sliding door. So the screen is quite cracked. Still works great, and I can see everything, but I think it decreased its value to thieves immediately when I did that. So you can also go that route in terms of personalizing things. So there is no way in UberSense to black out faces and stuff. What I've done with lower extremity stuff is I keep the face out, so that works. But the patient I did today was cervical range of motion, so his face is right there. You can take the angle thing here and draw it right across the face, so it does block them out a little bit, but not really. If you look on the bottom here, you have this is sort of the video progression as the video plays. So you can scrub back and forth through the video at high speed, and then here on the left for the left image, and on the right for the right image is a scrubber as well, so you can go frame by frame and really line things up exactly where you want them to be. It's a really, really nice program. Your tools up here include a drawing tool. The angle tool here is highlighted. You can draw lines to see, how are things lining up. You can circle things, whatever. So it's really, really quite nice. Quite nice. And another tool that I use extensively in my class is Twitter. And basically what I make them do is tweet at least once a week. So in my class, the students are in class 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they're in my class Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we arranged our semester that way so that we could take advantage of the things that they were learning in the clinic. And they could come here, they could talk to their classmates, they could talk to the faculty, they could ask questions, they could hey, I've got a patient I just saw yesterday who has a chief complaint of X, Y, and Z. Do you have any suggestions? This is what I did. Do you have any suggestions? Hey, what if you try this? Then they go out on Wednesday. They go try those things. Thursday they come back. Hey, how'd it go? This is what happened, and now I want to try this. Hey, that sounds like a great idea. Let me know how it goes. So we can really take advantage of what they're learning in the clinic when they're here in class. one way to formalize that is, so I have them tweet once per week, and I'll pick my favorites for the week, 2 or 3 for the week, and we'll have a discussion. So I'll say, Annabelle, that was a pretty interesting tweet. Can you expand on it and tell us what was going on and what happened? So we can now share those. In a formal way, we can share those experiences with the class during class time. So we can discuss those clinical scenarios. But the other thing is, the literature is quite clear that the pathway to clinical expertise includes reflection and metacognition, so reflection on their reflections. So if all they are is reflecting, writing things down about what happened to them or so on, that's kind of a diary. But if they reflect on that, or if they share that, those reflections, and discuss them, now you're going to the next level, and that is one of the prerequisites towards to becoming a clinical expert. So this is a way for them to start thinking about what happened during their day. It's only 140 characters, right? And reflection once a week in 140 characters is not going to kill you. Right? This is what I tell the students. All we need is one. However, I think it's relatively easy to do. However, I do make it part of their grade. And it will change. If they don't tweet at all, they could lose a half a grade. They could go from A- to a B+, which kills our students. So they end up tweeting. But they end up doing it. In fact, the students from last semester asked if they could keep tweeting this semester, and they have been. So it's kind of a nice thing. They do buy into it. And I asked them also to tweet at the end of the semester what they liked or didn't like about doing this. And many of them said something along the lines of, I found myself during the day thinking about what I was going to tweet that night, which is exactly what you want your students to do when they're in clinic, is to think about what they're doing and think about what went well or what didn't go well. So we're getting them to reflect a little bit. We're getting them to share their experiences in the clinic in a formal way. It provides us that mechanism to do that. So I would like to show you a couple of my favorite student tweets. This first one is, thought of appropriate quote after today's class, but tests don't make a diagnosis, thinking does. Good. Something stuck with that student, so good. You're going to think about things, not just do a whole bunch of tests. Nice. We have let me just digress for a second. We have, in the past, had students write, an essay or a short paper on what their experience was in the clinic over a 2-week period or a 6-week period. Man, that's a lot of reading to do, right? And it's always at the end. And so all you get is what they remember from the 2 weeks or 6 weeks before. This is that day. This is that week. This is while they're in the middle of it. And in 140 characters, as you'll see, you can get an idea of where they're at. Okay, so that's one. Patient with migraines reports apartment caught fire, lived next to the mafia, then lived next to a meth lab. I'm thinking stress may have a part in this. Yeah, I think you're right. Very perceptive. 97-year-old female, gait balance eval, recent fall while hiking. Walks 3 miles a day, looks and functions like she's 60. Love it. Exercise is medicine. Right? So not only am I seeing that here's a student who is recognizing that 97 is the new 60 maybe, or 60 is the new 97. I'm not sure what that is. But, we have students here that are in their mid-20s, and they think 35 is old. They think geriatric medicine starts around 40, right? And here you're getting the sense that, wow, 97, you can do a lot when you're 97. You don't have to be, crippled in a wheelchair or something like that. And the other thing that you're getting the idea is that they're starting to understand the importance of exercise and what exercise can do for people and how important it can be. So, that's what drew my eye to that tweet. Here's another one. Lots of self-reflection today after my patient was admitted to hospital after a high-grade cervical spondylolisthesis was found on MRI. So, high-grade cervical spondylolisthesis could be life-threatening, and here's a patient who is, referred for physical therapy. they're getting exercises or manual therapy or whatever, might be expected in a physical therapy treatment regimen. And they, sort of discovered, hey, this isn't quite right. Sent her out or got a referral to the physician, did the MRI, and found it's dangerous condition. So great, hands off. So nice learning experience that we talked about in class. Who would have thought a 20-minute slide board transfer was a success? So here's a student in 140 characters, way less than 140 characters, is telling me that they are redefining what their idea of success is very different from what maybe a patient's idea of success is. And to me, that's a sign of growth. That's a nice sign of growth. And then here's my favorite. Just had an 84-year-old patient write, quote, "Those were the days," in response to the Oswestry sex life question. So, yeah, they can be funny. They can be very reflective. They can be very, pointing out some things, some good things that happen in clinics, some bad things that happen, and we can bring those into the classroom quite easily using this Twitter. So, I'm a big fan of this. As a way to get that self-reflection going. So, going back to our students, how did they use it? For the most part, 48, let's say 50% of the time, they were using their iPads for information or background information. Okay, this is in class now. About 15% of the time, they're using it as a tool. About 12% of the time for professional communication. Patient education, they have occasionally some patients here in class, and so they're educating their patients in class. The 10% or so that other includes looking up information. This is one student's example, and she went to our combined sections meeting last year. So she was looking up information about the meeting, and there's an app for that, of course. What was being presented and where and when and so on. She actually shared some information with occupational therapy students as well as her classmates. The tool kind of things, she also did some research for notes during meetings. She recorded lectures and she videotaped or took a video of class. So those are kind of the things that this student was using them for. And then the apps that she used, I just put them down as by frequency of use. So Goodreader, which is a PDF reader, she used the most, 37% of the time. 27% of the time, Safari, looking up information. Actually, a fair amount, over 10% using it for pictures or video. Notability, which I'll talk about with our note-taking app. MedCalc Pro, which is a medical calculator. CSM 2012, so that's the meeting app that I talked about. Hippocrates is the drug reference. DrawMD is the patient education anatomy app. Core Exam is the tool to that gives you the musculoskeletal examinations. NerveWiz we talked about is innervations. Medscape for drug reference. Another anatomy app, and Penultimate is also a handwriting note-taking app. So you get an idea of what they were using the apps for, and you can also get an idea that they were using it quite a lot. So I'm going to switch the video here from the laptop to my iPad, so I can give you a quick demo of a couple of apps. If there's any apps that I've spoken about that you'd like to see in particular, let me know. Let's make sure this is working. There it goes. Let's see. So you can see in the bottom right is Goodreader, and we talked about that a fair amount. So this one looks like this. So here's an example of a PDF, and it's highlighted. I've highlighted a bit. I can obviously zoom in, and then if I want to highlight, I take the on the right toolbar where it says ABC. I can right there. I can tap on that and I get my highlighter, and then I can just tap on whatever words I want and highlight as I wish. So that's pretty nice. I'm just going to cancel that. I can also I can freehand write on this, and there's actually this magnified area here, so I can move this wherever I want. And then down in the bottom, you can see that what's in the rectangle up top is magnified in the bottom. So now I can write down the bottom, and it allows me to do things down there that, particularly if I'm writing things, I can write a little bit better here than I can if I get rid of the magnifier and try to write here. It's just harder to be as clean. So kind of a nice feature there. And then the other thing that's nice about this is you can, again, store things in different folders. So on the left side, I've got folders for my headache files, my falls, gait, glenohumeral joint, and so on. Another nice thing is if on the right where it says Find Files, I can star ones as my favorites and then get quick access to those guys. So here again, I've got class photos. I've got the student handbook, which I refer to a fair amount in my role as the director of the program. So those are the types of things that I can get quick access to. And as I mentioned, down here at the bottom where it says Connect to Servers, there's my Dropbox connection. And as soon as I tap on that, the Dropbox I don't know, dialog box or whatever comes up here, and these are all folders that are in my Dropbox folder. So I have a question. Let me just switch the mic.
Go for it. So with Goodreader, is the annotations, does that save onto the document and can it be exported out with the annotations on it, or is it only annotated in Goodreader and you have to keep it there?
Yeah, so good question. Let me go to a file and I'll show you. I'll just pick one at random here. Down at the bottom right, very, very bottom right, is your classic action button, which is the rectangle with the arrow coming out of it. So if I tap on that, you'll see I can open it in different apps, and I can flatten it, flatten the copy. So I can either export it with the annotations separate, so that other apps like Adobe Reader, for example, I can still manipulate those things, or I can flatten it so that they become part of the file. But yeah, whatever I've done to this, I can export. And you can see I can email it, can email a summary and so on. And actually, the kind of a nice thing is if I decide I want to do something to this file, so I haven't done any annotation to this file yet, it gives me the option to save to this actual file or to create a copy and then annotate that. So it renames that one the same name with annotated to it. So that's kind of a slick deal. So if you want to keep a clean copy, as you know, to give to your students, for example, plus your copy, which has all your highlights and notes on it, you can do that quite easily. Okay, answer your question. So that's Goodreader, and again, this is where a lot of my documents are, and you can see I've got quite a number of folders in there, and then also quite a lot of files that I'm still working on filing away still. Okay, so that's Goodreader. The next one I promised to talk to you about is Notability. So Notability is at the very bottom. It's in my you can keep 6 apps at the bottom of your screen all the time. So Notability, it made it to in importance to that status. So if I click on or tap on Notability, let me just quickly show you its capabilities. So this is one where I use my stylus for. So because I can do a fair amount, and I do a fair amount of handwriting here. I'll show you an example. So the second file down here is the Teaching with Technology conference. So if we go to that one. So this was this past May conference on the other campus. And I was kind of learning it a little bit, so I also did a fair amount of doodling and drawing, but you can see on the left. But that's why I brought this one up, because if I tap on the bottom right, I can get this magnified area here. And again, it allows me to write something in the magnified area, and it shows up above, and I can write a little bit more cleanly using that magnified section there. If I want to get rid of it, there is the eraser tool, and just basically kind of go through all that and erases everything. I can cut, paste, I can do all those things as well. And then another nice thing is I can pick between different colors and different pen sizes, so that if I want to highlight something or I want to sort of have something stand out. For example, you can see that on the left here, here, big idea. This is something I want to do. So some ideas about how we might handle tuition costs or whatever. So, so this is an example of what you can do with your handwriting and note-taking. I do a lot of notes here. But as I said, another nice thing about this app is that it does record, and I'm going to find, here we go. So if you look on the right, you see the red dot and the file size. All of those files have some audio associated with them, so they can be relatively big. But this was a keynote speech that was given at a meeting this past October in Quebec, and as he was talking, I was sitting back in the audience, but the pickup on the iPad was sufficient enough so that I can actually listen to this and understand what he's saying, even if I'm in my car. And I'll play a little bit of it so you can hear. It's not the best, but I'm sitting about 200 feet away from the guy in a huge conference room, and
biomedical is a bit schizophrenic. The opposite cannot happen. Biopsychosocialism welcomes and embraces biomedical thinking, and it enriches it powerfully by, for example, the addition of interaction between brain and body, preventative medicine, interdisciplinary medicine, psychosocial predictors to chronic problems, the encouragement to get into the lived experience.
The volume is enough for me to hear. I have more problem with his Australian accent than anything else. But here's the nice thing about this program. If you look at the top, you see the slider going across, showing where in the audio you are. And you can slide that slider wherever you want and jump to the immune system linked to the brain. Which is nice. But what is really nice is I can tap on a word. So if I go to super sensitive pain radar and tap on that,
as we have neurons, the astrocytes, the microglia.
If I tap on super sensitive pain radar, the audio will jump.
It hurts when I think of moving. I can't even watch that in desensitization. Lovely to see that.
So what this allows me to do is, rather than having to type up write some extensive notes, I basically do it in context with now he's talking about super sensitive pain radar, and I can jump to the audio.
Or, as I'd say to a patient,
hear what he's
let's get some good movement.
So there are points that I want to listen to
before we actually.
So I found this to be invaluable at meetings like this, scientific meetings, but also at meetings.
Pain for the brain of a patient that has what we call a supersensitive pain range.
So, so that's Notability. It does have a reasonable file system, as you can see on the left. We've got folders that I can close. So my USC folder, APT folders, and then inside of that we have subfolders, and then files inside of there. So it's kind of nice that way, and I can share different notes, email, share it through Dropbox, Google Drive, Box. So these are all web-based server solutions. I can print it. I can open it in iTunes or port it into iTunes to get it onto my laptop, or I can open it in some other app. So this is probably my second most used app overall in terms of functioning as a professor, not as a clinician. So I'm going to switch back. Are there any other apps that you're interested in seeing? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's up here on upper left. No, not ready for that. So a couple things kind of unique to UberSense is it's sort of organized around sports. So, golf or whatever. So you kind of have to go through this. And they do have, this is an example of these videos come with the program. So there's an example of somebody who is not going to play, apparently. All right. Well, it would play if I had the video. Before I leave the screen, so the big red dot there allows me to, that's what allows me to record. All right. So let me go back. It will record from the camera. All right. So if you want to walk across the room, I can demo with you. But let me get back to. There we go. Yeah, no, you can create your own. Yeah, you can put your own, whatever you want in. And I can't access it right now. I can show it to you. I use this on my iPhone because I have it in my pocket all the time. So I have more videos on my iPhone than I have on here, and it's all set up. Other questions or apps that you're interested in seeing? Yeah.
Just a general question. You talked about being able to use your iPhone as an app as a controller for.
Yeah.
You said that as long as you're on the same network, and I have a lot of issues with the networks here, with connecting an iPad to a computer or phone with iPad. Even if you're on the same network with all of the firewalls and here, they won't use this controller. Can you run into that problem? Is that not a way around that problem?
So the question is, using the iPhone as a remote to run a presentation that's on your iPad, you have to be on the same wireless network. And have I run into any problems with USC's wireless network and accessing or connecting the two? And I actually haven't. And I've done it relatively frequently here in this room. So I'm not sure where the issue would be. Hang on a second.
Go ahead. So you're using it with Keynote specifically. So is it because your iPhone and your iPad are already linked that they know one another so they can find each other? I don't know what issue I've been having with some other apps where they're not linked by Keynote, where it's an app that you're trying to use to control the iPad or to control a computer and it can't find. So are there other things that you've used, or is it just strictly Keynote that you're using that type of a controller for?
Yeah, sorry. So I've used it strictly for Keynote. So if you look in the third row on the far left, the remote, that's the remote app to run a Keynote presentation. It's on my iPad, but I use it on my iPhone to run the presentation off the iPad. The same row, third row, if you look across the second from the right, Doceri. Doceri is an app. I have only played with it a little bit, but it shows, I think, some promise. Doceri is an app that you have on your iPad, and you also have the app on your laptop or on your desktop, and it will allow you to take over your desktop computer. And there is a whiteboard function there. So The one thing that I miss in this classroom, and I wish I had the capability to do, is, as you know, as you see, part of the reason why I'm standing here is because I'm on camera and the camera's pointed here. But the other reason is I have to have the iPad plugged in order to present up here. There is a wireless way to do that using Apple TV. But the problem with Apple TV is it creates basically its own wireless network. And I can hook it into the projector here and allow me to mirror whatever I've got here, or even on my iPhone, to the projector so you can see it up here. The problem with the Apple TV is USC will not allow it to access USC's network. So you can either use it to project here, and then you don't have internet access, or you can have internet access, but you can't project using Apple TV. So you're kind of stuck with one or the other. But Doceri is a way that I could control my laptop using Doceri, walk around the room, and I can actually draw and do stuff like as a virtual whiteboard, and that frees me up a little bit from being around, having to be here at the podium.
I was just going to comment. There's another app, not program, another app called Splashtop that does the similar sort of thing. And the nice part with that one is that it works not just on your iPad, but on your iPhone, and it works also with Android systems.
And it's called
Splashtop, and you can connect it to any desktop anywhere. So I use it to connect into my office desktop, my home desktop, and with USC, as long as I'm VPN, it's not a problem.
Good to know. Any other questions, apps, or anything that you'd like to see demonstrated? Okay. So I'm going to switch back here, and we're almost done. There we go. So just a couple things to think about in terms of using technology, either in the classroom or the clinic. And Doug Shook, I'm taking this quote from him. He's here at USC, and he said this at the technology conference. Technology is just a new type of chalk. What matters is how you use it. So, the iPad is, it's a really nice piece of technology, but it's really, chalk is just something you write with, but what you write, has meaning. So this is just something I can have hanging around, but what I use it for is up to me, and I can make it useful or not. We have had, for example, a number of discussions amongst our faculty about whether or not we should require our students to come in with either a laptop or a tablet. And so far we have resisted the temptation to require that of our students, mainly because I certainly feel strongly that before we make them bring the technology to class, we should make ourselves build into the curriculum reasons for them to have a tablet or a laptop. And if it's not built into, great, it's nice to have your handouts, but that's not a reason to force someone to shell out $500 for an iPad or a couple thousand for a laptop. So there should be things built into the pedagogy that utilize the technology and utilize it to an educational advantage. The technology shouldn't drive the pedagogy. We shouldn't sort of figure out, everyone has iPads, so how are we going to use that? We should figure out how we can get them to best learn, and can we leverage the fact that they're bringing iPads, iPhones, smartphones, laptops to class. Can we leverage that fact to create a more rich learning environment? So, one thing that we try to do as much as we can, particularly with a push towards learner-centered instruction, is allow the students to discover information as opposed to have us stand up here and spew it out. So can be used, for example, the technology to entice the students to go learn things rather than on their own, rather than just sort of reading the handouts and the PowerPoint slides and stuff that we've developed. So, some nice pictures of our students here. I was supposed to be going through those as I was talking. So anyway, those are some things to think about. A couple just closing comments. We're working with the most technology-enabled generation in history. They are, a lot of times we think of them as being tech-savvy. They're actually not tech-savvy. If their iPad stopped working, they probably couldn't fix it. Or if their iPad or their laptop stopped working, they probably couldn't fix it. But they certainly are tech-enabled, and they're able to use technology in ways that we couldn't have even thought of 5 years ago, and they're discovering new ways to use them as well. But they are also a generation that's likely to have the shortest attention span in history because they are being drawn by so many things, and technology allows them to be distracted by I have my laptop here. I'm listening to my MP3 player or my phone. I'm getting text messages. I'm tweeting or getting tweets. I've got my iPad over here, and I'm trying to play, World of Warcraft or whatever's going on. So that's kind of, the student that we are faced with. Those are also the patients that we will be faced with. And it doesn't have to be the young folks. I'm having my patients in their 70s and 80s, and they're walking in with iPads, and they're like, hey, I read about whatever, what do you know about shockwave therapy for hamstring injuries? I don't know, let me find out. So, that's going to be a challenge for us. It'll be a challenge for us as faculty to engage them in constructive ways. Really what they face is a world where, the aware but the unwary can quickly be buried in information. The unaware just sort of move forward in blissful ignorance. Maybe that's, for some people that's better. But, of course, what we're trying to do is get them to move forward in an intelligent way and move forward in constructive ways so that, for us, at least in a professional program like physical therapy, they are turning what the technology and the technology use into constructive use in the clinic so that their patients are getting better outcomes. So just some things to think about as we move forward with the new stuff that comes out. Question? Go ahead.
Yeah. My question is that I recently, in fact it was maybe 2 nights ago, taught in our technology enhanced room, but that's really irrelevant. But I felt as if I had to strip them of every bit of technology and make them attend. And by the time I finished, by the time I worked them over, it was really like being a drill sergeant to get them to attend to me. But by the time I finished, you could hear a pin drop as the class progressed. And I worked them over more and more to learn how to attend to one thing. I'm wondering, do you have, I know you're kind of old school and new school. You've been here a long time and you've seen the transition of the generations. Do you see it as problematic that I know they have to do all of this and they have to be able to be facile and move about in the technological world, but they also need to be able to deeply focus on a problem. And do you see that there's any tension between using your brain in that focused, unidimensional, one system, like one modality, like lecture and teacher and problem solving, versus the kinds of information processing that goes on when they're tweeting and they're thising and they're thatting and they have too many attentions?
So the question is,
do they attend? Can they attend deeply? when they're, I guess my question is, it really has to do with pedagogy. Like this, is a signature, what is the signature pedagogy? Is it learning really all of this and how to, or is it learning how to really focus deeply or on one thing, one modality?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I find that if you present our students with a problem, let me back up. If you ask the students first day of school, why are you here? They will tell you almost universally, I want to learn how to help people. Great. Here's a person who needs help. They have a problem. Solve the problem. Day one, they're like, what do you mean solve the problem? I don't know anything. Well, what do you need to know? You know, have you ever seen an ankle sprain? Oh, yeah, I know what an ankle sprain is. Okay, great. What do you need to know to be able to manage to solve this patient's problem? You want to help them. How are you going to help them? Well, it'd be nice to know what an ankle is and what is sprained and what is a sprain. And so they can start developing the question. And so, great, you learn this in anatomy, you learn that in physiology, you learn this in pathophysiology, and so on and so forth. And if you want to get them to focus, so I get them in the third year, and they've had a fair amount of practice because they've gone into the clinic, and they are in the clinic during my class, and they are beating their heads against the wall. That is the patient problem. I have this patient, I'm trying to get them better. So they have this driving force. So I think if you can identify what their driving force is, what their motivation is, you can take that, use it to your advantage, and get them to attend. Now, particularly in patients who present with complex problems, multi-system involvement, and so on, or chronic problems that have now developed into other issues. Take as an example someone who comes in and really requires a differential diagnosis. There's a fair amount of mental flexibility that needs to take place in order to solve that patient's problem. So you may be juggling, for example, a dozen different diagnoses, and juggling not only the name of the problem, but also how it presents in history and how it presents on physical exam, so that you can design your subjective exam. You can ask them questions that will help you pare that dozen diagnoses down to a couple. And then knowing what tests you need to do in order to pare that down into the most likely. So there's a fair amount, because no patient ever presents textbook. So, wow, there's 5 things that make it seem like it's this, and there's 3 things that would argue against it being that. So I'm going to put those 3 things over here in the parking lot, and just hang on to those for a second. I'll come back to them later. And then now I've got another one, and there's 5 things, and there's 3 things. I got to put that in a different parking lot. And so they're juggling lots of information. So there's a certain amount of mental flexibility that I think they need to have. And I couldn't say this for sure, but I think some of the juggling they do with all the technology they have lends them a little bit to being able to do that. Now, our pediatric faculty member here, Linda Fetters, states categorically there is no such thing as multitasking. You know, we look at our kids and they're doing all these things. Wow, look at them multitasking. No, what they are able to do well is they are able to jump from one task to another. Leave that one, go to this one, leave that one, go this one. So World of Warcraft, make my move, go over here, get a little text, go over here, do a tweet, come over here, write 2 sentences in my essay, come back over here, another move, World of Warcraft, whatever. And they're able to move from one thing to another pretty quickly. And that may be a useful thing in a clinical setting that we may want to take advantage of. So again, in my class, very complex multi-system patient cases that they're working their way through, built that way on purpose, so they have to manage lots of things. And I think they do, if you watch them and you listen, and we end up with all the white walls in here covered in ink, you get the sense that they're able to do that. So yeah, there are times if you're lecturing or you need them to, you got to pay attention. Here's a great example. You're in the lab, and they're trying to learn a motor skill, and they're yakking and they're doing this and they'll stop. There should be no talking right now. You should be paying attention to your patient on the table. So there are times when you have to attend as well. You know, and I guess it's our job to teach them when those times are. I'll give you an example using my son. When he was 12, he was a kid when he was playing Little League that, you know, parents are yelling at him, pay attention, you know, focus. He's the kid out in the outfield and he's digging in the dirt and playing with the grass or whatever. You know, and you know, someone hit the ball and the ball go right past him. So he started playing volleyball, and there's volleyball works like when the ref blows the whistle, the play starts, and then when the play is over, whatever, the ball's hit down, the ref blows the whistle again, play's over. And then there's they get the ball back, and they go back and serve, ref blows the whistle, and the cycle starts again. Well, he had these sort of issues where he would pay attention during the play, and then he's still paying attention. The play's over, and he's still playing, and eventually he'd wander off, you know, and then the ref would blow the whistle and play, but he'd still be wandering. When he figured out that, hey, there's a time to pay attention between the whistles, and there's another, the rest of the time you can look around or do whatever you want. When he figured out that cycle, he started, not only did his, you know, sort of, he's 12 years old, so his volleyball got better, but his schoolwork got better. Now you have to pay attention to your homework. You know, now you have to pay attention in class. And up until that point, he was all over the place. So I sort of always think about that with our students. And okay, is it time to attend? How do we get them to attend now? Now's the time you have to attend. And to be honest with you, when I'm in lab, I go to my dad voice. Hey, stop it. Pay attention. Stop talking. Here we go. You know, when I'm in here, there's like chaos going on in here because they're talking, they're going through lots of stuff, and I'm okay with that. But then when it's time to bring it all together, okay, stop. No, stop talking. You know, your classmates here are talking. Be courteous, so on. Time to attend. So I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing that they can do those things, but can we harness it, I think, is the trick. Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So 2 issues. One, Florence, you're probably aware there's quite a bit of literature looking at this distractibility and ability or inability to pay attention and to sort of deeply process things. Russell Poldrack has done a lot of work in this, especially with younger generation that you know, is doing exactly what Rob describes, you know, flitting from one thing to another. And he would argue that this is not, this leads to sort of a superficial sense of what's going on. And I think that's part of what you might be sensing. I think Rob's pointing out that this ability to switch from task to task could be a good thing if harnessed, but there's also the sense that you need to know when you need to be paying attention and processing something at a deeper level. The other thing I wanted to ask is, how do I know whether these apps are valid? In other words, you showed that orthopedic one. You know, I pay $4.99 and I upload this and I go to it as a resource. Where do I see where this thing has been vetted and checked? And, you know, just like when I read a paper in the literature, I go to see who wrote it, what journal is it in, you know, what's the referee system for telling me what rigor was used to put this out there. And I always worry with these apps because, you know, anybody can publish an app. And I don't know where it's been and who it's been vetted by. Is there a way of knowing that?
And what it's picked up along the way.
Yeah.
Not that I know of. So the App Store, I don't know about Android. All I know is the App Store for the iOS. But the App Store vets apps in terms of their suitability for children, you know, that kind of a thing. There are, I think, some usability guidelines and user interface guidelines that they have to follow. But other than that, in terms of are they, you know, is there any truth in terms of what they do? The App Store certainly does not do that. What we Well, what we teach the students is to look at these things, these apps, the way we teach them to look at, a journal article. And one of the things that we have them look at, so if you look at this core app that I talked about, they actually have links to the articles because they have the sensitivity, specificity, likelihood ratios, predictive values, and so on for these tests they are. So it's very evidence-based. It's up front in the advertising. This is evidence-based. They talk about the links, but it takes you right to the PubMed thing. So that's one app that does that. But let's say you look at an anatomy app. How do you know that anatomy is correct, accurate? Yeah. What the students have used it for is patient education, and they're certainly accurate enough for that. The Nerve Whiz is certainly accurate enough for a student to study from. You look through that, and you can double check if you're not sure. But it's kind of a way for you to have your nerve study guide with you wherever. But of course, you still have your anatomy textbook or whatever. So we do tell the students, look, you don't. It's like you go to Google, just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. So what are your how are you going to manage that? So let me just make one more comment, and I'll get your question or comment. There's an interesting point was made at the Teaching with Technology conference that people of the same generation as our students were asked, who do you trust? And they said nobody. But the point was, it's not that they don't trust anyone. It's like, they don't have a Walter Cronkite, right, that we grew up with. But even if they had a Walter that guy, they wouldn't believe him either. What they're saying is that they won't believe anything until they see it corroborated by multiple sources. So they go to Google. A lot of them, our students, they go to Google and they look and see, okay, great. And they go, well, let me go to WebMD, and let me go to the Google Scholar, and let me go to PubMed. And they will triangulate it across several sources. And this is what this generation does, because they haven't had the Walter Cronkite figure. Closest thing they have is Dave, the Comedy Central guy. Not Chappelle. Not Stewart. Jon Stewart. I knew it wasn't Dave Stewart. He's a singer. He was a guitarist for... anyway. Jon Stewart. That's sort of the closest thing they have. And he's a comedian. And he'll tell you up front, I'm a comedian. I'm not whatever. So I would guess, I would hope that if that's true, that they will also take these apps and they'll sort of triangulate and see whether or not it's real or not. So they'd go back and they'd check in their anatomy book, is Nerve Whiz actually accurate? Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to add that there's something that's coming called Haptique, which is funded by Qualcomm.
Can you spell it?
Haptique. Haptique. And what they're doing is they are evaluating medical apps. And so you would buy a subscription to Haptique, and they'll vet everything, and then you can select from the apps that they've vetted.
I see.
So that's coming. They don't, it's not there yet.
Yeah.
But they got the funding. So.
Do you think that's a good thing?
Well, that
you
was
think
gonna
this
be
is
my
something
second,
we need?
Yeah, that was going to be my second point. Is that I think what you can do is you can buy these apps, or many times they give you a freemium, free option, and then you can basically give it a 1-star and say it sucks, it's not evidence-based, PT should not use this or whatever. We as a community can start to educate people coming behind us, which is I think another way that I think. The idea, like you said, of going to a journal, and what journal it's in, who was the author, and so there's a sort of a reputation behind that. I think that's also going away because there's so many open journals now that you can publish stuff, and then you just have to read through those comments, and people like you who know a lot need to comment saying, this is a bunch of crap. So, but I think we do that as a larger community, and I think it's, the days are going to go away that you submit a paper and it gets reviewed by some hoo-ha, and then it gets published or it doesn't. So I think there probably will be the haptic, because I asked them at mHealth back in December, how many physical therapy type apps are you guys reviewing? Oh, we're not doing those just yet. Like that's next tier. They're really focused on physicians. Yeah.
Well, there are disciplines where they don't publish in journals. They just put things up on a in an archive. Yeah. Physics does that, and
blogs.
Basically, the community decides whether it's crap or worth.
And I think that's really where we're headed. And blogs, I mean, there's a lot of people who have reputations and have blogs, and people read that much more so. In fact, I heard a lecture yesterday by Eric Topol, and he said he gets most of his information from Twitter. It's his number one resource to get information. So, I think that is where we're going.
Yeah, I just add to that as far as the apps. I always try to evaluate them myself if I can for free, but the best thing is actually reading through the user comments. Yeah. And it's the same thing if I go to Amazon to buy a book. I'll read through the user comments, and the user comments are pretty up front and forward. So if somebody has reviewed the app before you, they'll put in there, this is not accurate, or they'll put their issues with this, or this is a really great app. Everything looks perfect, everything is annotated correctly, things like that. So I rely a lot on user comments. The only issue you have to watch out for is that when they release a new version of the app, which some people will do that like every week, you have to go through the user comments for all versions. Because Apple only presents initially the comments for the current version that's being published. So just make sure you always click on the link for all versions to make sure you can go back through and read other user comments on the app. And if there's not any user comments, that usually to me is a bad thing. That means a lot of people aren't using it, or that hasn't gotten that. And then the other is looking at something like the Nova apps, the anatomy apps. They have a whole series of them, and $10 to $50, and it's obviously a very well thought out process. They have a lot of apps. They're getting people to buy them, so I put a lot of stock in the fact that they're probably higher quality. They're more correct than the one, this little free app that, it's the only thing they put out, right? And you can actually click on the person who published the app as well, and you can go and read about them, and learn about them, see all the other apps they published. They only have one app. Again, maybe it's great, but do they have the skill and technique to have done all that? So.
Do you have the students comment on the apps, Rob? I mean, that would be, if they're triangulating and they find there's a problem, they should enter that somewhere.
It's been very informal. I mean, Julie. So Julie Tilston is trying to formalize this with this research project and giving it to the students, giving these 10 iPads out and having them track their usage. So, these are the apps that have sort of, quote unquote, stood the test of time. I mean, they've found them to be very useful. Things change, but I have an app on my iPhone that's a basic tilt meter, and I use it for range of motion. And we had an app off one day in class because we had like 3 different tilt meters. And what does yours do? What does yours do? And we actually spent more time on looking at those than the $1 it's took. It's cost to buy the app really meant. But we ended up with one that we all liked, and that's what we use for range of motion. The residents have told me this is what I use. And they're the ones who actually started with Goodreader and found Goodreader to be very useful. I like Notability. Jim Gordon likes iAnnotate. It's another one, but I've invested in this. I know how to use this one. I'm fine with it. It does what I want. So just a couple other things here, and I know you guys want to go. It's late, but this is the bone model app that we were talking about. I was talking about earlier. So we can go to the knee, and I just think this is really slick, and particularly for patients to be able to rotate this thing around, and say this is what your knee looks like from the side, and this is what it looks like from the back, and then to be able to take it in any of these views and then flex and extend it. So the reason why you're having pain underneath your kneecap is because of that, or the reason why you're having pain at your patellar tendon is because it's getting stretched or whatever. I mean, it's just that, these things are phenomenal. Is that a completely accurate? No, it's not, but it's certainly good enough for a patient education session. And then this AVOR, which is the bottom left here, is probably one of the coolest apps. And I'm treating a lot of folks with vestibular problems, but I can set this up to be fully functional in all the canals or dysfunctional in different canals, and I can create the top 3 are the different canals. The next one is compensated, uncompensated, and I can do cerebellar problems. I can add saccades. I can do the right side, left side, whatever. But if I go to this view, as I'm moving around the iPad, it takes advantage of the fact that there's an accelerometer on here. So when I'm talking, you see how the cochlea lights up. So we can tell our patients, I tell my patients, that's the hearing part of your inner ear. And when you move this way, see the horizontal canals are excited or inhibited, and then the eyes are going to move that way or the other way. And if I move this way, your eyes are going to go in that way or that way. And you can see down the bottom left, there's the, what the right side, what the eye is actually doing. Yeah, so not a lot of happening with linear stuff. AVOR is the name of the app. And then another nice thing about this is, hang on a second. So we can move it around. And then, let me just get back to, this is one that's very useful. I think it's this one. Yeah, oh, that was it. I passed it. So actual size of the labyrinth. So they start to understand how small that little gadget is inside their ear and what it's doing and how important it is, but how small it is. And this is why the doctor can't just go look and see the crystals in your ear, because it's too small. So that's an app that's free, and it's phenomenal. It takes advantage of the accelerometer and the microphone and kind of all the stuff that's in that comes with an iPad. So these are sort of my med ed apps, and then my medical refs and tools. So I actually have an eye chart on the left. That's an accurate eye chart. Hippocrates for drugs. I got several drug things in there. ICD-9 codes if I need to look those up. QX Calculator is a really nice calculator for clinical prediction rules and clinical guidelines. So you basically, it asks you questions, you answer it based on the patient's answers, and it'll tell you, yeah, this person needs a cervical x-ray, or this person might have a DVT. The far top row, far right, QX Calculate. Okay. So that's a pretty slick one, and that one's free. This is one that Julie Tilson has her students use for the EBP classes, evidence-based practice classes. So if I want to know if someone needs an X-ray for the cervical spine, yeah, he's over 65. It was a dangerous mechanism. He doesn't have paresthesias. It was a simple rear end. Is he able to sit? Yes, he was. Ambulatory, yes, he is. Delayed onset of neck pain, no. Absence, yes, there's no midline tenderness. Can he rotate 45 degrees? He needs radiography. And if you know the C-spine rule, you know it's because he's over 65 years old and it was a dangerous mechanism. But if you don't know the rule, you can still arrive at the point where, hey, this person does not belong in my clinic. I need to get him out of here. So, and you can see there are several, there are many, sorry, not several, but many of these calculators in all different specialties of medicine. Free. So, and reference. I think you saw that at the end there. So, so you can see I have a fair number of, there's PubGet, PubMed on tap. I haven't actually opened those yet, the bottom right and bottom left. Lots of stuff out there. And even something as simple as a metronome, third row down on the left. just to allow me to, when I'm doing my my vestibular assessments and I want to move at a particular speed, and I set the metronome and we can do that. I've also used it with Parkinson's patients when they're walking, because that type of sound feedback actually improves things like gait cadence and stops and reduces freezing, things like that. So it's 8:20, which is 5 minutes past what I think I'm supposed to go. But I'm happy to show you other apps. Stick around here if you want, or I'll let you go. And if there aren't any other questions. Thanks. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you, Rob. Welcome. Good. I learned a lot. Good.